Welcome once again to the Brownstone, Wolfe's sanctuary of logic, orchids, and murder. Do tell us where in the world you're listening from, and don't hesitate to share your thoughts. If you enjoy these cases, consider liking and subscribing. Now then, shall we begin? Nero Wolfe and the story he never told Archie. I came down from my room at 9 sharp, shoes polished, tie knotted, and an appetite for the day already forming. Fritz was clearing away the remains of Wolfe's breakfast tray, porcelain cups and toast crumbs balanced like a still life on silver. The air in the hall carried the faint scent of coffee, though Wolfe himself was nowhere in sight. That was no surprise. Between 9 and 11 the orchids had first claim. I was ready to file the morning mail or phone Kramer to harass him about his waistline, when Wolfe's voice drifted from the office with the weight of command. "Archie, attend me." I stepped in. Wolfe was seated at his desk in the yellow chair, a heavy cream envelope resting on the blotter. His bulk filled the room with its usual gravity, though his eyes did not meet mine at first. Instead, he tapped the envelope with one finger, as though confirming it was still there. The blinds were tilted to admit a grey Manhattan light, and the lamps had not yet been switched on. It was daylight enough, though it gave the room the look of a lawyer's waiting room on a winter morning. "You will deliver this," Wolfe said, sliding the envelope forward, "to the office of John H. Kearns, attorney at law, 245 Madison Avenue. Place it in his hand. Say nothing. Accept no receipt." His eyes, dark and steady, fixed on mine. "You are not to open it, nor inquire into its contents." The command was sharper than his usual style. Normally, if he sent me on an errand, he indulged in at least a paragraph of unnecessary phrasing. Today, each word had the shape of a brick dropped into place. I lifted the envelope, felt its weight, and found it heavier than a simple letter. The flap had been sealed with enough wax to stop a safecracker. Wolfe's lips thinned as I weighed it on my palm. "I'll deliver it," I said. "Though if you keep issuing orders like that, people might mistake me for an errand boy." "Your impertinence," Wolfe replied, "is perennial. Leave it in abeyance and be gone." That was the end of the dialogue. He turned back to the open book beside him, signalling my dismissal with a lift of one hand. The envelope went into my inside pocket, and I buttoned my coat. There was nothing more to learn without breaking his command, and Wolfe never forgave disobedience. Still, I had been with him long enough to know when his restraint meant trouble. Something inside that envelope was heavier than the wax suggested. Outside, the morning carried the sound of truck engines and newsboys calling headlines. The air had the tang of coal smoke mixed with the smell of bread from the bakery on the corner. I hailed a cab on 35th Street, the driver a lank man with a cap tugged low. We rattled east, then uptown through the clatter of Midtown, horns punctuating every stoplight. I kept one hand against the envelope, though it was unlikely anyone intended to steal a lawyer's correspondence from me. Madison Avenue at that hour was a parade of clerks, secretaries, and men who looked as if their shoes pinched. I paid the driver, climbed the steps of a sandstone building, and checked the directory. Kearns, John H., Suite 4B. A brass plate confirmed it on the door. Inside, the reception smelled of paper and ink. A girl with tidy hair looked up from her typewriter and asked my name. "Archie Goodwin, for Mr. Kearns." I held up the envelope. She vanished through a side door. A moment later, a man of medium height, grey around the temples, stepped out. His suit was precise but carried the look of wear. He extended his hand, palm out, not for a shake but to receive. I placed the envelope in it. He glanced once at the seal, his expression tightening almost imperceptibly. Without a word, he turned back into his office. The door closed with a muffled click. That was all. No receipt, no comment. Errand complete. If I had expected fanfare, I was disappointed. Still, Wolfe's instructions had been exact, and I had no license to improvise. I tipped my hat to the receptionist and left. The return trip I took on foot, letting the city's racket wash over me. Pushcarts rattled, a street organ ground out a tune, and the pavement vibrated with footsteps. The envelope was gone from my pocket, but its weight remained in my thoughts. Wolfe's manner had been odd, and his silence on the subject odder still. By the time I reached the brownstone, the clock in the hall struck 11. I let myself in with my key, as Fritz would not dream of answering. The air carried the aroma of veal stock from the kitchen. Fritz was clattering pans below in his kingdom, while Wolfe's orchids stood watch above. I entered the office. Wolfe was already there, back from the plant rooms, his vast frame filling the yellow chair. He looked up from a dictionary as I entered, but his gaze went not to me but to the space behind me, as though measuring shadows. "It's delivered," I reported. "Into Kern's own hand, no receipt, no word exchanged." "Very well," Wolfe said. He closed the book with a finality that carried more weight than my errand. No more. That was all. No explanation, no inquiry about the journey. He picked up another volume as though the matter were concluded. His tone carried irritation, not at me but at the necessity of the errand. His bulk seemed heavier in the chair, his lips pressed tight. Fritz brought in a tray of chilled beer and set it on the stand without a word. Wolfe reached for a glass, filled it with practiced care, and drank. The ritual was familiar, yet his eyes remained fixed somewhere inward. I leaned on the corner of the desk. "You've sent me on stranger tasks, but never with so little chatter. If you're keeping secrets from me, I'd like a hint at least." "You will have none," Wolfe said. "Spare me your importuning." That snapped shut like a trap. For Wolfe to cut short conversation was unusual enough to be a clue in itself. I opened my mouth for another attempt, but closed it again. He had shifted his gaze to the globe by the bookshelves, as though geography mattered more than partnership. The envelope, whatever it contained, had already altered the atmosphere of the office. The lamplight, though unlit, seemed ready for evening, though the day outside was still young. I crossed to my desk, sat, and opened the mail. Bills, circulars, and a letter from a tailor who still hoped for Wolfe's custom. I filed them with more noise than necessary, but Wolfe paid no attention. He sipped beer, one glass after another, until the tray was empty. His silence filled the room more thoroughly than words could have done. At 1 o'clock, Fritz entered with luncheon: cold salmon, cucumber salad, bread, and a light white wine for Wolfe, milk for me. We ate in silence, the clink of cutlery echoing in the room. Wolfe's appetite was reduced, his fork moving with mechanical rhythm rather than relish. That, too, was a sign. Fritz cleared the plates with a glance at me, as though asking if the master were unwell. I shrugged. When the door closed behind him, Wolfe set down his napkin. "Archie, enough. You have delivered the envelope. The rest is mine." His voice was calm now, but the undercurrent of irritation remained. "Fine," I said. "Though if you want me to keep my nose out, you should have hired a wax dummy. I'll be in the front room if the phone rings." I left him to his silence, yet as I stepped into the hall I knew the errand was no trifle. Wolfe's restraint was a shell, and something within it was waiting to crack. Whatever story he was hiding, it had just taken its first step into our lives. Evening in Manhattan had settled with the usual weight of horns and footsteps beyond the brownstone walls, but inside, the office kept its own rhythm. Wolfe sat in the yellow chair, his bulk arranged with the precision of a stone monument, while I filed notes from the afternoon's mail. The lamps glowed amber, curtains drawn against the city, and the room smelled faintly of old leather and Fritz's veal consommé that had carried upward from the kitchen. It was a respectable setting for a quiet night, until the bell rang with a hesitant pressure, neither timid nor bold. Fritz, true to form, remained below in his kitchen kingdom. The front door was mine alone. I crossed the hall and opened it to find a man standing stiffly under the porch lamp. He wore a navy overcoat that had seen more years than Polish, and the cap in his hand looked frayed at the edges. His hair, clipped short, was white enough to mark him as retired. His eyes moved once past me into the hall, wary as if expecting a uniformed guard to appear. "Good evening," he said, voice rough with salt and tobacco. "I was told Mr. Nero Wolfe receives clients here." "He does," I said, "and I receive visitors first. Step inside." He obeyed, boots striking the tile with practiced measure, though his hands betrayed a faint tremor. I led him into the office. Wolfe looked up, eyes narrowing a fraction, but made no move to rise. "Mr. Wolfe," I said, "a gentleman for you, retired Navy, unless the uniform surplus stores have started renting by the hour." The man's mouth twitched, not quite a smile. Wolfe inclined his head toward the red chair opposite. "Be seated. State your name and business." The officer lowered himself, keeping his cap on his knee like a shield. "Commander Albert Tillotson, United States Navy, retired. My business, sir, is survival of reputation. I am threatened." Wolfe steepled his fingers, the lamps catching the sheen of his cufflinks. "By whom?" "That," Tillotson said, "is the devil of it. I cannot say. Anonymous letters, telephone calls at odd hours, hints passed through acquaintances, always the same theme, that an event during the war, long buried, will be dragged into daylight to ruin me. Archie Goodwin, certified listener of tall tales, leaned back and took stock. The man's face had the weathered look of years at sea, lines cut deep around the eyes, yet his voice carried both command and unease. He was not a charlatan, but neither did he speak with the calm of a man sure of facts. "Threats," Wolfe said, "are abundant in this city. Why should yours command my interest?" Tillotson drew a breath. "Because, sir, if they succeed, the scandal will be national. I served with distinction, but there was one proceeding in 1943, a tribunal over conduct during convoy duty. I testified, decisions were made, and men's careers ended. I believed it settled. Now, after years of quiet, I am told that accounts, records, and even testimony will be painted anew, with me as villain. I have family, a wife who does not know details, and a reputation I had thought safe." At that word, tribunal, I caught Wolfe's expression harden, subtle as a flicker in stone. His eyes dropped half a shade, lids heavy, and his fingers ceased their gentle rhythm. He said nothing, but I marked it. Wolfe never altered face for trivia. "You have evidence of the threats?" Wolfe asked. "A letter received last week," Tillotson replied, fumbling in his coat. He produced an envelope, creased from repeated folding, and passed it across. I took it, examined the typed sheet. No signature, no address, only block letters warning that his sins at sea would soon be known. The words carried more malice than artistry. "Calls, too," he added. "Voices disguised, speaking of files retrieved, of testimony misquoted. I cannot trace them. I feared to go to Naval Intelligence lest the whisper itself spread." Wolfe read the letter once, lips compressed, then handed it back with distaste. "Petty," he said. "A child's stratagem. Yet you are agitated beyond proportion." "Because I know what they aim at," Tillotson said quickly. "That tribunal was not public. Few recall it. If dredged up, it can be twisted. I cannot name who seeks it, but I know they wish me disgraced." I leaned forward. "Why come to us and not the police?" "Because, sir," Tillotson replied, turning to me, "the police know nothing of convoy courts or sealed Navy records. They would laugh until papers landed on a desk in Washington. By then, my ruin would be complete. I was told Mr. Wolfe is discreet, capable, and not swayed by uniforms." "True," Wolfe murmured, "though I am also disinclined toward trifles. Mr. Goodwin, the fee structure." I produced a card, explained terms. Tillotson nodded, though his hand shook as he signed. He glanced at Wolfe, hoping for some reassurance, but Wolfe had resumed the stillness of a judge waiting out testimony. "Who," Wolfe asked at last, "would profit by your ruin?" The commander rubbed his temple. "There are several. A subordinate relieved of duty after the tribunal, a widow whose husband's case was tied to my report, a politician who once blamed me for hindering his contracts. But years have passed. Why now?" "That," Wolfe said, "is precisely the question." He closed his eyes a moment, then opened them. "Mr. Goodwin will assemble a list of those individuals, their current circumstances, connections, and capacities. You will supply names and whatever addresses you possess. Further detail is your obligation." Tillotson swallowed. "I can. I kept records, though I had hoped never to consult them again." "Hope," Wolfe said dryly, "is a barren diet. You will return tomorrow at 6 with those names. Until then, refrain from discussing this matter with anyone. Mr. Goodwin will see you out." The dismissal was as abrupt as the admission had been. Tillotson rose, cap clenched, offered a stiff nod, and followed me to the hall. His shoulders had lost some of their square set, and he walked as though carrying invisible weight. At the door he paused. "Mr. Goodwin," he said, low enough that Wolfe could not hear. "I saw his eyes when I mentioned the tribunal. He knows more than he admits. I trust you more. Watch him." I kept my face neutral. "Good night, Commander. Sleep if you can." He left into the city dusk, his figure swallowed by street lamps and passing cabs. I closed the door, leaned against it a moment, then returned to the office. Wolfe had not moved, save for the beer glass now half empty at his elbow. Well, I asked. He did not glance up. A man's past, once buried, should not be disturbed, yet it scratches. That tribunal, I pressed. You knew of it. Pfui, I know of many things. Do not presume. Which, translated, meant my suspicion had found its mark. He reached for his glass, drained it, and set it down with deliberate care. The amber light glowed against the rim, and his eyes, fixed not on me but on the curtained window, carried the weight of something withheld. I left him there, though the silence that filled the office was not peace but pressure, the kind that grows before storms. Whatever had passed in 1943, Wolfe remembered it, and it had just walked into our office in the shape of Commander Albert Tillotson. Morning began with the sound of footsteps above and the faint creak of the pipes that carried Fritz's early kitchen industry through the walls. Wolfe had not yet descended from his room, which meant the office was mine for the quiet part of the day. I spread the morning newspapers across my desk, coffee beside me, and let my eyes run down columns with the speed of a man who had long since learned the difference between gossip and signal. Halfway through the Gazette, my gaze stopped cold. A headline tucked beneath the fold announced, "Retired Naval Officer, Found Dead in Midtown Hotel." The name beneath it was Commander Albert Tillotson. The piece was brief, written with the tidy detachment of a staff reporter, discovered in his suite at the Hotel Broxton, revolver near the bed, a single shot, death immediate. The police preliminary was suicide. I leaned back, the paper crackling in my hands. The man had been in this room less than 12 hours before, voice trembling as he spoke of threats and tribunals. Now he was lying in a hotel morgue. His reputation spared nothing by the Gazette's tidy prose. Suicide, they said. I'd seen enough cases to know that word was often a convenient broom. The stairs groaned, and Wolfe appeared, descending with the slow gravity of a man approaching his orchids rather than his breakfast. He was dressed, but not yet engaged with the world. He entered the office, took one look at my face, and halted. "What is it, Archie?" I folded the Gazette and passed it across. He read without comment, but I saw the shift in his eyes at the name. The paper fell silent against his knee as he set it aside. "So soon," he murmured. "That's one way of putting it," I replied. "He walks out of here with a head full of fear, and by dawn he's dead with a revolver beside him. Either he was the most efficient client we ever had, or someone else decided for him." Wolfe settled in the yellow chair, fingers steepled. "The police will rule suicide. Their appetite for complexity is slight." I waited for more, but the words did not come. Wolfe leaned back, closed his eyes, and let silence do the rest. The silence lasted until 10 minutes past 9, when the doorbell rang with a blunt insistence that carried through the hall like the bark of a drill sergeant. I rose, crossed the hall, and opened the door to find Inspector Kramer planted squarely on the stoop. His overcoat flared, cigar clamped between teeth, and eyes already smouldering. "Goodwin," he growled. "Where's Wolfe?" "In his chair," I said. "Same as always. Come in before you chew through the doorframe." He brushed past, the smell of smoke trailing with him. I led him to the office. Wolfe, who had not moved, lifted his lids with the displeasure of a man disturbed at digestion, though the only thing he had digested so far was the Gazette. "Morning, Inspector," Wolfe said, voice flat. "Morning, my foot," Kramer snapped. He planted himself in front of Wolfe's desk, not taking the red chair. "You saw Albert Tillotson last night?" My head jerked up. "That was quick. You've got fairies on your squad." Kramer shot me a glare. "Hotel records. He told the clerk he was coming here. That clerk's got ears, and I've got men who use them." Wolfe's expression did not change. "And?" "And this morning he's dead. 1 bullet. You expect me to believe he came here to chat about orchids? What did he want, Wolfe?" "Nothing of substance," Wolfe replied, voice measured. He spoke of unease, of memories unpleasant. I had not accepted him as a client. I turned, ready to correct him, then stopped. Wolfe's tone brooked no interruption. For the first time in our association, he had shaded the truth, not with omission, but with a deliberate smothering. Kramer's face darkened. "Don't toy with me. The man walks out of here, and hours later he's stretched in a hotel room. If you know something, spill it." Wolfe reached for his glass of beer, which Fritz had set earlier on the stand, and drank. He set the glass down, wiped his lips, and said, "Inspector, You arrive with conclusions faster than the facts allow. A man is dead. You call it suspicious. I say possibly. But you know my position. I offer what my conscience permits, no more. Kramer barked a laugh without humour. Your conscience, that's rich. This stinks, Wolfe. He had no reason to top himself, not unless somebody gave it to him. I think he was squeezed, and I think you know who by. You think, Wolfe repeated. That is your privilege. Proof is another matter. I watched the exchange, my pulse steady but my mind not. Wolfe was holding back. He had never lied to Kramer before, not outright. He had danced, twisted, delayed, but always within the bounds of his own strange honesty. Now, something was buried, and he meant to keep it there. Kramer ground the cigar between his teeth. Smoke curling through unlit ash was already long. Listen to me. If I find you've sat on evidence, I'll drag you down to Center Street myself. Don't test me. You may try, Wolfe said, voice calm as winter stone. The inspector spun on his heel, coat flaring, and stalked out. I followed to the door, watched him jam his hat low, and march down the stoop like a battleship under steam. The door shut with a finality that left the house too quiet. I returned to the office. Wolfe had not moved. He sat with eyes closed, fingers resting on his stomach, as though he could shut out the morning by sheer force of will. Well, I asked. That was a fine performance. Care to explain why you told Kramer nothing when last night you agreed to take Tillotson on? Wolfe's lids lifted a fraction. Archie, I said he would return with particulars. Until then, engagement was not consummated. You may quibble, but the truth is flexible. Flexible, my eye, I said. You're withholding. From Kramer. From me. That's not like you. Before, you kept details until they ripened. Now you're locking me out entirely. That's more than habit, Wolfe. It's a choice that shifts the ground under me. Fritz entered quietly to collect the empty glass. He glanced between us, noted the tension, and retreated without a sound. His step on the stairs faded, leaving me alone with Wolfe and silence. I sat, leaned forward, and let the weight of the morning settle. A man who had placed his trust, fragile as it was, in Wolfe's intelligence was now dead. The official word was suicide, but my instincts told me otherwise. Kramer thought the same, though his anger blinded him to subtler shapes. Wolfe knew more. I could see it in the tight line of his mouth, in the refusal of his eyes to meet mine. The office, normally the surest ground in my life, had turned uncertain. Wolfe's fortress of words had gained a shadow. For the first time since I'd walked into his service, I felt he was guarding something from me, and that knowledge cut deeper than any headline. Outside, the city noise continued, horns blaring, voices rising, lives moving on. Inside, one man's silence had redrawn the room. The morning's tension had not dissolved. Wolfe remained immovable in his chair, lips pressed like a vault, refusing to let me past whatever he was hiding. My instructions, clipped and final, were to canvass the men and women linked to Commander Tillotson. I had the names he gave, passed in careful handwriting, and Wolfe's order rang in my head as binding as a steel bar. Find them, observe them, and report. It was the closest thing to honesty he had given since the commander's visit, and I was left to carry it into the streets. The first on the list was Lieutenant Harold Bristow, though lieutenant no longer applied. He had been stripped of his commission during the same tribunal Tillotson had spoken of, and his bitterness had seasoned in the years since. I found him in a walk-up on 8th Avenue, the stairwell damp with the smell of cabbage and pipe smoke. He opened the door halfway, eyeing me with suspicion, his hair untidy, his chin rough with stubble. "What do you want?" he demanded. "Conversation," I said easily. "Archie Goodwin, investigator. I'm looking into the death of Commander Tillotson." His laugh was short and sour. "Looking into? Don't waste your time. The man finally took the bullet himself, same as he ordered for others. He didn't order bullets. He testified." "And wrecked me," Bristow snapped, stepping closer. "He stood in that room in 43 and laid down words that ended my career. You think I forget? You think men like me forgive?" I watched him carefully. His anger was real, but anger can be worn like a suit. "So, you had motive," I said. "Did you have opportunity?" His eyes narrowed. "That's your game. You fish for confessions in hallways. I had no need to kill him. His guilt did the work for me." He shut the door, chain clattering, and left me with the odour of cabbage again. I walked back to the street, noting his bitterness was ripe but not conclusive. Men who spit venom often lack the poison to act. Still, he was one name with teeth, and I wrote it in my notebook with care. The second was a different sort of citizen. Mrs. Eloise Vance, widow, lived in a brownstone of her own on Park Avenue, though hers had a doorman and carpets thick enough to drown sound. I presented my card and was shown to a drawing room where sunlight pooled on polished surfaces and fresh flowers masked the city's smell. She entered with grace, a woman of 50, with eyes that had learned the art of appraisal. "You're looking into Commander Tillotson," she said, settling herself on a sofa of pale green. I read the news, a sad business, though I cannot feign surprise. "You knew him," I said. "My husband's fate was sealed in that tribunal. The commander's testimony weighed heavily. You see, Mr. Goodwin, reputations can be crushed as easily as crystal. He crushed my husband's." Her voice was steady, her hands motionless against silk. I asked, "Did you speak with him recently?" Her smile was polished silver. We crossed paths. He attempted civility. I replied with cold truth. I told him some debts are not erased by time. "That sounds like a threat." "It was honesty," she replied, "but honesty is not murder." I studied her. The room glowed with the wealth of contracts made during war, and I knew enough to read the line between influence and action. Still, her composure could be the finest disguise of all. When she dismissed me with a nod, I left with the certainty that her interest in the commander's ruin had never waned. By then the city had slipped to afternoon, traffic swelling, horns sharp against brick. My third name waited in a bar on the Lower East Side, a man known in whispers as Leonard Lenny Corder, fixer. He had drifted through politics like smoke, attaching himself to men with power and pockets. I found him hunched at a corner table, fedora tilted, cigarette smouldering in an ashtray beside a half-empty glass. He looked up as I slid into the opposite chair. "Goodwin," he said, voice low. "I heard you'd come sniffing. Wolfe send you?" I did not answer that. Instead I said, "Commander Tillotson is dead. You knew him." He smirked. "I know many. He stood in my way once. Contracts, Navy supply lines, red tape with teeth. He was a stone, and I wanted the path clear. That was years ago. The stone crumbled on its own." "You're not sorry," I said. "No reason to be," he replied, sipping. "His fall is convenient, that's all. But don't hang it on me. I fight in daylight, not in hotel rooms." I watched him. His hands were steady, his eyes cool. A man like Corder lived in the half-light of favours and debts, and his protest meant less than silence. Still, motive glimmered. Men in his trade rarely forget obstacles, and Tillotson had been one. When I left him, the bar smelled of damp wood and stale smoke, and the day had begun to lean toward evening. I walked the blocks back to our brownstone with the city's noise rising around me, cab horns sharp, vendors calling, footsteps quick on pavement. Inside, the quiet pressed close again. Fritz was preparing the 8 o'clock meal below, the scent of roasted chicken climbing the stairwell. I entered the office to find Wolfe still in his chair, book in hand, but eyes not on the page. "Well?" he asked. "Bristow is bitter enough to choke. Eloise Vance hides her knives in silk. Corder smiles like a man who has friends where the shadows are thick. Each had reason to wish Tillotson gone. None admitted to opportunity, but all could have taken it." Wolfe nodded once, eyes closing. "Adequate, Saul Panzer." I understood. I placed a call to Saul, brief and precise, instructing him to watch the widow, Eloise Vance, without contact. He agreed, his voice calm, the old flat cap likely already in his hand. When I hung up, Wolfe opened his eyes. "You will continue tomorrow. Report each word, each movement. Do not waste breath on speculation." His command was final. I looked at him, the man who had built his life on exact truth, and felt again the distance. He was concealing, guarding, building walls where none had been. My role was reduced to errand and shadow. I sat at my desk, wrote my notes with care, and let the silence stretch. The city outside roared, but in that office, with Wolfe withholding and suspects gathering like storm clouds, the stillness carried more weight than noise. The safe in Wolfe's office is not a thing of mystery. It sits in the corner like a banker who has lost his humour, squat, iron, unyielding, painted the colour of old ash. I know the combination, because Wolfe once told me he preferred not to rise when a bill collector came to call. But I also know he rarely stored more than contracts, account ledgers, and the occasional jewel on loan from a nervous client. That afternoon, with the office holding the heavy quiet of waiting, I opened it for routine filing. My eye caught a folder set apart from the tidy rows, thick, bound in heavy manila, sealed with string. Its label was plain. 4 digits only, 1943 to 1944, written in Wolfe's hand. I lifted it a fraction, felt its weight, and knew instantly it was no ledger. Papers rustled inside, dense and numerous. The string had been knotted with the care of a man who wanted no curious fingers straying. It was unlike Wolfe to mark so little, yet guard so much. The floorboards creaked behind me. His voice came, low and sharp. "Archie." I straightened, the folder in hand, and turned. Wolfe stood in the doorway from the hall, his bulk filling the frame, his eyes fixed not on me but on the file. His lips pressed together, then parted with measured words. "Put that back." I set it on the safe, my eyebrows rising. "All right, but it's labelled with nothing but years. What is it, Wolfe?" "Not now, Archie." That was all. 3 words, colder than a February morning. He stepped forward, retrieved the file with surprising quickness for a man his size, and returned it to the safe. He turned the wheel, spun the dial, and stood, hand resting on the steel. His face was set like carved granite. "I'm your assistant," I said. "Your partner, if we're generous. A client was in this office, left fearful, and now he's dead. If you have records that tie to him, I ought to know." "You will not," Wolfe said. His voice held finality, but not anger. It was the voice of a man holding a door against a storm. "There are matters that are not yours." "That file is tied to this case." "Perhaps. Still, not now." The words stung more than a slammed door. Wolfe had refused clients before, had dismissed suspects, but he had never once placed a wall between us. If he gave me an order, he owned it. If I chose a path, I bore it. But to declare "not now" was to claim a secret that cut our partnership in half. I leaned on the desk, forcing steadiness. "You think keeping me in the dark is smart? Kramer already smells trouble. If he gets wind you're hiding papers, we'll both be roasted." Wolfe moved to his chair, lowered himself, and pressed the tips of his fingers together. His eyes closed, lids heavy. "I will not discuss it. You may curse me if you wish, but spare me foolish repetition." There was no moving him. I bit back a reply and sat at my desk, the silence stretched thin as wire. Outside, the city's racket reached faintly through the curtained windows. Horns, footsteps, the long cry of a newsboy. Inside, the air seemed clogged with the single fact of that folder. The hours wore on. Near 3 o'clock, Fritz arrived with luncheon. Plates clinked, the aroma of roast beef and buttered beans filling the room. Wolfe ate little. He pushed his plate back after only a few bites, something I had seen happen fewer times than eclipses. Fritz paused, glanced at me, then at Wolfe, his Swiss restraint slipping enough to show concern. "Is the meat unsatisfactory, sir?" he asked. "No, Fritz," Wolfe said. "It is fine. I have no appetite." The words fell like stones. Fritz cleared the dishes with careful dignity, but his eyes met mine as he turned. They said more than words could. The master was troubled, and deeply. After he left, I said quietly, "Even Fritz can tell. You're rattled. That file has you eating less, and that's nearly a crime in this house." Wolfe's eyes opened, fixing on me. "Archie, if I wished to be prodded, I would visit a cattle yard." "That's not an answer." "It is the only one you will have." His tone ended it. I leaned back, the chair creaking, and stared at the ceiling. My thoughts rolled. A dead commander, suspects with grudges, threats whispered through telephones, and now a sealed file from a war Wolfe had never spoken of. He had concealed many dislikes, but never a history. The distance between us widened with every tick of the clock. Evening settled, lamps casting a soft glow on book spines and brass. Wolfe poured himself a beer, drank slowly, but without relish. I sat with my glass of milk, the taste flat, my patience thinner still. For the first time, the office felt less like a fortress and more like a cage, with 2 occupants keeping their own counsel. At 8, Fritz brought dinner, a carefully prepared duck with orange sauce, potatoes crisp, and greens dressed in oil. Wolfe tasted each, then laid down his fork after only a few swallows. His face remained unreadable, but I saw the truth in the untouched plate. Fritz cleared without a word, though the quiet clatter of silver was edged with dismay. When the kitchen door closed, I leaned forward. "You've never starved yourself for a case, Wolfe. What makes this one different?" He looked at me then, eyes dark, voice quiet. "Because, Archie, some truths are corrosive. They eat as surely as acid. Allow me the courtesy of deciding when to open the vial." That was as much confession as I would ever receive, and it unsettled me more than any corpse in a hotel room. The man who prized precision above all had admitted the existence of poison in his own keeping, and he meant to guard it until time itself demanded release. I sat back, the words sinking into me, and realized with a weight I had never felt before that Nero Wolfe was not only hiding facts from the police or the world, he was hiding them from me. Park Avenue, in the late afternoon, carried the gloss of a jeweller's window. The canyons of stone and glass caught the slanting light, and the doorman at number 712 wore his uniform with the solemnity of a bishop. I gave him my card, told him Mrs. Eloise Vance was expecting me, which she was not, and he judged me long enough to decide my tie passed muster. I rode the elevator in silence, the attendant no more chatty than a carved figurehead. On the 12th floor, I stepped into a corridor thick with carpet and hushed as a church. Her maid showed me in. The drawing room was a stage set in pale gold and green, curtains pulled back to admit the Manhattan skyline, rugs heavy enough to smother an army, and a crystal decanter on a polished table. I had not taken 3 steps before she entered, Eloise Vance, widow, 50 if she admitted it, in a dress that would have cost more than my monthly salary. Her hair was a careful shade lighter than nature intended, and her smile carried the warmth of a winter sun, bright, cold, and without heat. "Mr. Goodwin," she said, offering a hand tipped with scarlet nails, "how courteous of you to call." "I do my best," I said, taking it briefly. "Though you should know I'm here on business rather than courtesy. I'm inquiring into the death of Commander Tillotson." She moved to the sofa, sat with the grace of a practiced hostess, and gestured me to a chair opposite. "The Commander," she said, with a note that could cut glass. Yes, I saw the headlines. A tragic end, though not unexpected. He was a man chased by ghosts. "You knew him well," I suggested. "My late husband served with him," she said. "At the tribunal, it was the commander's words that crushed us. My husband carried shame to his grave, and I was left with polite condolences and cold shoulders. You may imagine, Mr. Goodwin, that I have not forgotten." Her eyes glinted, and I believed her. The room was filled with money's perfume, but the woman carried bitterness like a jewel, polished and worn close. "You spoke with him recently?" I asked. She tilted her head, smile sharpening. "No, why should I? I have no interest in revisiting wounds. He was a chapter I closed long ago." The denial was smooth, too smooth. I let my eyes wander as she spoke, noting details. On the side table, half buried under a magazine, lay a telegram. The paper was still crisp, the ink fresh. The return address read plainly, Hotel Broxton, Madison Avenue, the same hotel where Tillotson had been found dead. I kept my gaze from lingering, filed the fact in the back of my mind, and gave her my attention again. "Yet you called him a tragic end, not a surprising one," I said. "A man burdened by guilt seldom lives free," she replied. "I knew his conscience would catch him. Whether by his own hand or another's, it was bound to happen." "That sounds remarkably prescient," I said lightly. She smiled again, showing white teeth. "Observation, not prophecy. Don't twist my words, Mr. Goodwin." I let the silence hang a moment, the city faint beyond the windows. Then I asked, "Do you know Leonard Corder?" The name drew a flicker in her eyes, quickly masked. "I know many gentlemen, some respectable, some less so. Why?" "Because Corder's name also comes up when people mention the commander," I said. She leaned back, arranging her dress with delicate hands. "Mr. Corder is a man of political connections. I have attended events where he was present. That is all. I do not care for his company, nor he for mine." It was the kind of answer meant to end questions, but I was not convinced. I pressed once more. When was the last time you saw him? Her lips curved. Mr. Goodwin, you are bold. If you expect me to provide a schedule of my social life, you will be disappointed. My friendships are my own affair. I let it drop, because pressing further would only harden her walls. I rose, offered a nod. Thank you for your time, Mrs. Vance. If you recall any detail about the commander that might matter, my number is on the card. She stood, gliding to the door with me, and laid a hand lightly on my arm. You are direct, but you are also polite. Do not mistake honesty for malice, Mr. Goodwin. I did not kill Albert Tillotson, but if someone did, I cannot say the world is poorer. The maid showed me out. In the corridor, the hush returned, but my mind was noisy. The telegram sat in my memory like a flare. She had lied, and she had lied with style. Back on the street, the city's noise came at me in waves, horns and footsteps, voices and engines. I walked 3 blocks before a figure stepped from a doorway. Saul Panzer, cap pulled low, eyes steady, moved beside me. He had been Wolfe's shadow long before he ever shadowed suspects, and his discretion was as sure as his loyalty. She meets Corder, he said without greeting. I've seen them twice this week. Restaurant on Lexington, private room in the back. Yesterday afternoon she left his office on Canal. No handshakes in daylight, but the meetings are there. Any witnesses? I asked. Only me. They keep it quiet. He's cautious, she's composed. They talk long, leave separate. I nodded. Good work, Saul. Keep her under your eye. If she breathes too close to politics, I want to know. He gave a short nod, then melted back into the city's crowd, his cap vanishing among the hats and coats. I turned north, the noise of the avenue rushing like a tide. By the time I reached the brownstone, night had deepened. The hall smelled of Fritz's preparations for dinner, onions softening in butter, a faint trace of thyme. I hung up my coat and stepped into the office. Wolfe sat in the yellow chair, book closed on his knee, eyes lifting at my entrance. Well? He asked. She lied, I said. Denied seeing Tillotson, but had a telegram fresh from the Broxton on her table. And Saul says she meets Corder in private, twice this week at least. Wolfe's eyes closed briefly as though the facts were stones added to a burden. Ha, of course. That's all you're giving me? For now, he said. His voice carried weight but no detail. Continue. I sat at my desk, wrote my notes and felt the silence settle again. Wolfe had his walls, the widow had her smile, and somewhere between them lay the truth. By mid-afternoon the office had settled into one of those uneasy silences that carried more weight than noise. Wolfe was in his chair with the Oxford English Dictionary open across his lap, though the stillness of his eyes suggested his mind was elsewhere. I was halfway through sharpening pencils at my desk, not because the supply was dull, but because activity is a salve when your employer has been clamming up for days, when the front bell clanged with the authority of a fist on a barracks door. I set the pencils aside, crossed the hall, and opened to find Inspector Kramer planted on the stoop. His hat was pushed back, his cigar chewed nearly in half, and behind him stood Harold Bristow, the former lieutenant, face flushed and jaw set. Bristow's coat was thin, his shoes scuffed, and his eyes carried the glassy shine of a man ready to spit fire. "Goodwin," Kramer growled. "Where's Wolfe? We've got a guest." I stepped aside, let the 2 barrel past, and trailed them into the office. Wolfe did not rise, only glanced up, lids heavy, as Kramer steered Bristow to the red chair. "Here he is," Kramer said. "And he's got plenty to say." Bristow sat hard, leaning forward, fists clenched on his knees. "Plenty, yes. You want to know who pulled the strings that ruined Tillotson? Eloise Vance. That widow's been manipulating since the war. She's rich, she's sly, and she's been whispering poison in ears for years. You think she shed a tear at the commander's death?" She laughed. "I'll wager." His voice cracked with fury, echoing against the high shelves. Wolfe did not blink. He reached for the chilled glass Fritz had placed earlier on the stand, poured beer, and took a slow sip. The silence stretched until Bristow's chest heaved with impatience. "Well?" Bristow demanded. "You just going to sit there?" Wolfe set down the glass. "I will sit, yes. Proceed." Bristow pounded the arm of the chair. "I tell you, she was behind it all. During the tribunal, she passed information, turned allies against us. She profited from contracts while men like me were stripped of rank, and now, with him gone, she'll stand clear, untouched, while the blame falls on ghosts. But I know her. I know the smile she wears when another man's name is dragged through mud. She's poison, Wolfe, poison in silk. Kramer chewed his cigar and nodded once. You see why I brought him. He's got a finger pointed, and it ain't at shadows. I studied Bristow. His eyes burned, his words tumbled like stones, but under the heat there was no structure, just smoke and resentment. Still, I asked, what proof do you have she saw him before he died? He swung toward me. Proof. I've lived in this city long enough to know her kind. She's been meeting with politicians, with fixers like Corder. Men whisper, rumours spread. You think a man like Tillotson falls without a push? She pushed, I tell you. That's not proof, I said evenly. It's truth, he barked. Wolfe's hand rose, palm out, silencing the outburst. Lieutenant Bristow, you offer accusation without substance. Motive, perhaps. Opportunity, perhaps. But evidence? None. Your words are anger clothed as testimony. Bristow sprang half from his seat. You dismiss me? After what she did? After what he did to me? My career ended, my name dragged while she lined her pockets. You think I'd invent it? Yes, Wolfe said calmly. Men invent much to sustain their grievances. You are such a man. The air tightened. Bristow's face mottled red, his hands trembling. He opened his mouth, then closed it as though Wolfe's certainty had stolen the words. He sank back, breath rasping. Kramer shifted, uncomfortable. Look, Wolfe, the guy's got reason. You can't brush it all aside. I can, Wolfe replied, voice flat. Because he is a man of no consequence. His bitterness is genuine, but bitterness is not evidence. The widow may be culpable, but not because Harold Bristow shouts her name. That landed like a gavel. Kramer scowled, turned to me, then back to Wolfe. You sit there drinking beer and pass judgment like it's scripture. If she's guilty, fine, but you can't clear her by stomping on him. I have not cleared her, Wolfe said. I have cleared him. There is a distinction. The room fell still. I felt the surprise ripple through me. Wolfe, who dissected facts with surgical patience, had dismissed Bristow outright with barely a glance. It was certainty without evidence, and it rattled me. I leaned forward. Wolfe, I said, you're making leaps without showing your work. How can you be so sure? His eyes opened fully, dark and steady. Because, Archie, men who bluster reveal their emptiness. He accuses, yet offers nothing tangible. He is a decoy, witting or unwitting. I will not waste digestion on him. Bristow lurched to his feet. To hell with you, he spat. You sit in your chair, fat and smug, while men like me rot. You think I'm nothing? You'll see. You'll choke on your words. Kramer caught his arm, steering him toward the door. That's enough. Let's go before you say something that earns you a cell. Bristow yanked free but followed, muttering curses under his breath. The door slammed behind them, the sound echoing through the house. Silence settled again, broken only by the faint hum of traffic beyond the curtains. I turned on Wolfe. You toss him out as if he never mattered. Maybe he's empty, maybe he's full, but how can you be sure so fast? You didn't ask half the questions you usually ask. Wolfe lifted his glass, drank and set it down. I require no more. He has nothing. That's not good enough, I said. Not for me. You're shutting doors without even trying the handle. And for the first time, Wolfe, I can't tell if you're protecting the case, the truth, or yourself. His gaze shifted to me, heavy with warning. Archie. The single word carried weight enough to close the conversation. He leaned back, eyes half shut, retreating into his fortress of silence. I sat at my desk, tapping the pencil I'd sharpened earlier, the rhythm sharp in the quiet. For years I had trusted Wolfe's deductions, his uncanny ability to pierce lies. But now, with each withheld word, each abrupt dismissal, the ground under me felt less steady. Fritz entered softly to collect the empty glass. His eyes flicked from Wolfe's untouched plate on the side table to my face. He carried the tray out without speaking, but his shoulders were tense. He too saw the change. I leaned back, stared at the ceiling, and felt unease settle like dust. Bristow's fury had been loud but hollow, yet Wolfe's certainty rang louder still, and not in harmony. If Bristow was a smokescreen, then someone was moving behind him, unseen. and Wolfe either knew or guessed and refused to share. The office smelled faintly of beer and onions from Fritz's kitchen, familiar, but the comfort was gone. I had seen bodies in alleys, confessions in tears, but nothing had unsettled me more than Nero Wolfe drawing a line and leaving me outside it. The brownstone's morning rhythm was steady enough. Wolfe upstairs with his breakfast tray, Fritz in the kitchen arranging veal stock, and me at my desk sorting the latest batch of correspondence. Among the circulars and bills sat a yellow envelope from Western Union addressed to Mrs. Eloise Vance. Delivered by mistake, perhaps, or slid under our door by a careless messenger. Either way, it lay on my blotter, and the hotel name across the header, Hotel Broxton, stopped me. I opened it. The message inside was brief, typed in the clipped style of men who pay by the word. Meeting confirmed, 10 p.m, Suite 412, A.T. The date stamped only hours before Tillotson was found dead. The commander had arranged a meeting with the widow on the very night his life ended. I folded the slip, tucked it in my wallet, and sat back. That telegram was the first tangible link between the two, proof enough to tear down her careful lies. My first impulse was to storm up to the orchids and present it to Wolfe, but I knew his morning schedule was a wall not worth battering. I would wait until he returned to the office. At 11 he descended, heavy steps deliberate, face unreadable. I laid the telegram on his desk without a word. He read it, eyes scanning once, then folded it slowly and set it aside. "Well?" I asked. He merely grunted, the sound of a man acknowledging the obvious. He rose surprisingly and left the office without explanation, climbing the stairs to the plant rooms. The door closed, lock clicking, leaving me staring at the space he had occupied. By noon, the orchids still held him captive. Fritz served luncheon in silence, the roast chicken left mostly untouched by Wolfe's absence. I ate mine with growing irritation, each bite a reminder that Wolfe had chosen orchids over discussion. The afternoon brought Kramer, his arrival marked by the doorbell's clang and the rumble of his voice before I had even ushered him in. He marched into the office, hat pushed back, cigar mangled between his teeth. "Goodwin," he barked. "Where is he?" "Upstairs," I said, "communing with flowers. You'll need a ladder if you want him." He growled, pacing. "I've got a widow denying she ever saw Tillotson in months, and I've got whispers saying otherwise. If Wolfe knows something, he'd better spit it." I leaned back. "Funny, I've got the same complaint." Kramer stopped, eyes narrowing. "You holding out too?" "Not by choice," I said, "but Wolfe is tight as a drum." Kramer thumped the desk with his fist. "Damn him, this case stinks and he sits upstairs watering petals. If I find out he's hiding evidence, I'll drag him to Center Street myself." I didn't answer because my wallet held the telegram, and Wolfe had refused to breathe a word. I felt caught between duty and loyalty, neither comfortable. By 3, Wolfe descended at last, smelling faintly of the humid air above. Kramer pounced. "About time. Are you in this case or not?" Wolfe lowered himself into the chair, hands steepled. "Inspector, your bluster is tedious. What is it you wish?" "Confirmation," Kramer snapped. "Did Tillotson meet Eloise Vance before he died?" Wolfe's eyes flicked once toward me, then back to Kramer. "I have no such confirmation." The lie hung in the air like smoke. I shifted, stunned again by Wolfe's refusal. Kramer cursed, stormed to the door, and slammed it behind him. Silence reclaimed the office. Wolfe poured himself a beer, drank slowly, eyes fixed on nothing. I leaned forward. "You're playing dangerous, Wolfe. That telegram nails her to him hours before his death. You know it. Why not tell him?" "Because," Wolfe said, setting the glass down, "timing matters. Knowledge released too soon is squandered. And in the meantime, Kramer suspects us of stonewalling. He suspects always. It is his nature." I stared at him. "You're letting me twist in the dark. You've never done that before." He met my gaze, unflinching. "Archie, not now." The words were final, the wall unbroken. He leaned back, eyes closing, retreating into silence. My frustration boiled, but there was no crack to force. Fritz entered quietly to clear the untouched luncheon plate Wolfe had left earlier. His eyes flicked from Wolfe's drawn face to mine, concern plain. "He eats less," Fritz murmured when Wolfe's eyes were closed again. "This is not good," I nodded. "Tell me something I don't know." The evening dragged. Wolfe remained locked in his thoughts, the telegram hidden in his desk. I wrote my notes, but each line felt hollow. The riddle had grown, a widow lying with calm steel, a commander arranging a meeting he never left alive, and Wolfe, for the first time in my memory, keeping the truth behind a door I could not open. Evening carried its usual order. Fritz had cleared away the plates from dinner with his careful dignity, leaving the faint aroma of lamb and rosemary lingering in the air. Wolfe sat in his chair, the lamplight turning the rims of his glasses to dull gold. He was quieter than usual, even for him. I was at my desk, flipping through the day's notes, when Fritz returned with the small silver tray he favoured for fruit. He placed it on the stand with his customary grace, then hesitated, which for Fritz was the equivalent of a trumpet blast. "Mr. Wolfe," he said softly, his accent rounding the words, "may I speak?" Wolfe looked up. "Of course. What is it?" Fritz glanced at me, then back at Wolfe. "The night Commander Tillotson came, I saw a man leaving. He was not known to me. He slipped down from the stoop as I came from the kitchen window. A stranger." The words dropped into the room with a weight that stopped my pen cold. I straightened. "Hold on. You saw someone leaving that night. Why didn't you say so sooner?" Fritz spread his hands slightly, a gesture of apology. "I thought perhaps you had seen him, Mr. Archie. I did not wish to intrude where it was not asked." My temper rose, but I kept it level. "Describe him." Fritz shook his head. "It was brief. He wore a dark coat, a hat low. He moved quickly. I cannot give more, but I am sure he was not a neighbour I know." I turned to Wolfe. He was not surprised. He regarded Fritz with calm gravity, then nodded. "Yes, I saw him too." The words struck harder than Fritz's confession. I leaned forward. "You saw him? And you're telling me only now? Wolfe, that could have been the key. Tillotson leaves, another man slips out, and we've been talking about telegrams and widows while the real clue is sitting on the stoop." Wolfe's eyes closed briefly. "Archie, not now." I stood, pacing to the window, the curtain brushing my shoulder as I turned back. "Not now? That's all you've given me for days. A man comes, talks of threats, and dies before morning. You hold files, you hold telegrams, and now you hold the fact another visitor left this house the same night. What are you shielding?" Wolfe did not raise his voice. "I withhold nothing useful. The man who left is not our quarry." "How do you know?" "Because I know." That was not explanation, it was a wall. My trust, usually iron, cracked at the edge. "You're protecting someone, is that it? An old acquaintance from your years abroad? Someone tied to that tribunal?" His gaze met mine, steady as ever, but behind it lay something closed, impenetrable. "Archie, there are times when silence is duty. This is one." I let out a laugh without humour. "Duty? To whom? To the dead man, or to the one who walked down our stoop?" "Enough," Wolfe said, final as a gavel. He turned back to his book, opening it with deliberate calm. Fritz, uneasy, gathered the tray and retreated without another word. The door closed softly behind him. I stood by the desk, hands braced, staring at Wolfe. "You're not just holding back from Kramer. You're holding back from me. That's new, and I don't like it." Wolfe's lips tightened, but he did not answer. The silence thickened, filled only by the muffled noise of traffic from the street outside. I dropped into my chair, anger cooling into suspicion that gnawed at me more than any crime scene ever had. If Wolfe had recognized that man, if he had chosen silence not from ignorance but from recognition, then we were in deeper water than I had thought, and the man I trusted above any was no longer telling me the depth. The lamp burned low, Wolfe read with the appearance of serenity, but his untouched glass of beer on the stand told the truth. He had lost his appetite again, and Fritz's concern earlier now carried fresh weight. Silence pressed in, and I wrote the day's notes with a heavy hand, each stroke of the pen a question Wolfe refused to answer. The day had slipped into a grey dusk when Saul Panzer arrived. He knocked once, light and precise, and I let him in. His cap was pulled low as always, his coat brushed clean of street dust, and his eyes carried that calm steadiness which made him Wolfe's best operative. He removed the cap, nodded, and stepped into the office. Wolfe sat at his desk with the lamps lit, the amber glow catching the rims of his glasses. He gestured Saul to the red chair. "You have something," Wolfe said. Saul nodded. His voice was quiet, each word measured. "Yes." I followed Corder as you asked. He keeps his habits tidy. Office on canal, meetings in back rooms, conversations hushed. Yesterday he met with Mrs. Vance again. 1 hour. Nothing outwardly criminal. But today I traced him to a file clerk in the old Navy building on Varick. The man was nervous, took cash. Corder left with a folder under his arm. I made inquiries. The file he bought was a sealed record from a wartime tribunal, dated 1943. Proceedings classified. Wolfe's fingers stilled. His eyes closed a fraction. Which tribunal? The convoy disaster, Saul said. A covert operation off the coast of Brittany. Supplies intended for resistance fighters. Something went wrong. Civilians died. The tribunal questioned officers, recorded testimony, then buried it. The commander testified against the operation. His words destroyed reputations. Now Corder has those papers. The room was heavy with silence. Wolfe leaned back, lids closing, and for a long moment he did not move. I felt the air thicken. My voice came sharper than I intended. Why should Corder care about an old tribunal? Why pay for papers nobody is supposed to see? Saul's calm eyes shifted to me. Because the file names men, officers, politicians, even contractors. Some are still alive, still influential. If Tillotson's testimony comes out again, fortunes and reputations topple. I sat back, absorbing it. The puzzle pieces clicked, but one shape remained glaring. And Wolfe? Where does he fit in? Wolfe's eyes opened at that, dark and steady. His voice was low. Tangentially. Meaning what? I asked. He did not answer. Saul's gaze flicked between us, then back to Wolfe. The file lists interpreters used during the hearings. Exiles, linguists, men with knowledge of dialects. One name is yours, Mr. Wolfe. I felt the words strike like a hammer. You? I said. You served as an interpreter at that tribunal. You never told me you worked for the Navy. Wolfe exhaled heavily, closing his eyes again. I was not in the Navy. I was employed briefly by a liaison office. They required accuracy and testimony. My knowledge of French and German sufficed. I sat in that room, translated and recorded. That is all. All? My voice carried disbelief. You've spent years insisting you never budged from your rules. You never mentioned this. It was not relevant, Wolfe said. His tone had no heat, but it carried weight. It was a task of language, not of war. I had no command, no responsibility. I translated words, nothing more. But you were there, I pressed. You heard the testimony, you knew the men, and you chose silence. Tillotson was one of them. He came to you not as a stranger, but as a figure from that room. That's why you've been stonewalling. That's why you won't tell Kramer. Wolfe's gaze met mine with quiet force. Yes. The admission chilled the room. Fritz entered then with the evening tray, the aroma of beef consommé rising from silver bowls. He placed them on the stand, glanced at Wolfe, then at me. His brow furrowed with worry. Wolfe lifted a spoon, tasted, then set it down almost untouched. Fritz lingered, lips pressed thin, then withdrew without comment. The door closed softly. I rose, pacing the room. Do you realize what this means? Corder has the file. He can twist it, leak it, use it to ruin men or blackmail them. Tillotson knew, he panicked, and now he's dead. And you, of all people, sat in that room and kept silent for years. I kept silent, Wolfe said, because silence was required. Those proceedings were sealed, the tribunal concluded, the consequences assigned. It was not my place to trumpet them. Not your place? My voice sharpened. You've built a career tearing lies apart, yet you kept the biggest one in your safe. You could have warned me, warned Kramer. Instead, you let us stumble in the dark. Wolfe's eyes narrowed. Archie, do not confuse secrecy with betrayal. I honor my obligations. That file is not mine to parade. Even when it costs lives? His gaze hardened. Do you accuse me of his death? I stopped pacing, met his eyes. I don't know what to accuse you of anymore, but you knew more than you told, and that's not the Wolfe I work for. The silence after that was long. Wolfe leaned back, eyes closing, hands folded across his stomach. He did not answer. The lamplight glowed against the spines of books, the clock ticked steadily, and the city outside hummed with horns and footsteps. Saul rose quietly. I'll keep watching Corder. He will try to use those papers. When he does, I'll be there. Do so, Wolfe murmured. His voice was heavy, tired. Saul nodded, placed his cap back on, and slipped from the room with his usual quiet step. The door closed behind him, leaving Wolfe and me alone. I sat slowly, feeling the ground tilt beneath me. For years I'd trusted Wolfe's judgments, his honesty as precise as his appetite. Now I saw a man who had once sat in a tribunal where lives were weighed, who had chosen silence, and who now carried that silence like a stone. It explained much: his curt refusals, his retreat to the orchids, his irritation with Kramer, but it left the murder untouched. Wolfe opened his eyes again. Archie. Yes? You will continue your inquiries, but do not repeat what you heard tonight. Not to Kramer, not to anyone. The past is a mire. Step into it, and you will drown. I swallowed hard. You're asking me to keep faith while you give me none. I give you enough, he said. His voice was steady, but his face was drawn. Trust me a little longer. I leaned back, milk glass untouched at my elbow, and wondered if trust could stretch that far. The hour had settled heavy on the office, lamps burning low, the city's noise muffled by curtains. Wolfe had been immovable in his chair, eyes shut, fingers steepled, while I paced like a man in a cell. The weight of withheld truth pressed the room flat. I had reached the edge of patience. Wolfe, I said, stopping at his desk. Enough. You've dodged, you've clammed, you've drowned me in silence. But this is no longer a matter of your private obligations. A man came here, begged your help, and by morning he was dead. You knew him before he ever rang our bell. You'll tell me how. Wolfe opened his eyes slowly. They fixed on me with the calm of stone, but something beneath them stirred. You presume much. I presume nothing, I shot back. Saul's legwork dug your name out of that tribunal. He found you in the record, interpreter to words that condemned men. You can't tell me you sat there like a statue and forgot. You knew Tillotson, and you chose silence. He shifted, fingers pressing together. At last he spoke. Yes, I knew him. The admission landed harder than any shout. I drew a breath, forcing it steady. Then why conceal it? His gaze lowered to the blotter. Because what bound him was not yours to know. He bore guilt, a convoy operation, supplies mislaid, lives lost, civilians, women, children, slain by error and arrogance. He testified against it. His words ended careers, but his conscience carried more weight than judgment. It consumed him. I stood still, hearing the words echo. And you? You translated. You heard it all. I did, Wolfe said. And in hearing I saw what words can do. He lived but hollowed. He sought absolution in secrecy in years of silence. I respected that silence. It was not mine to share. Anger welled in me, sharp. Not yours to share. Wolfe, you've built your life exposing secrets, slicing through lies. But when it touched you, suddenly silence becomes virtue. You left me blind. You left Kramer blind. That's not your creed. He lifted his head, eyes dark with iron. Archie, a man entrusts me with words under seal of duty. I do not parade them for convenience. That file, those memories, they were his burden. To reveal them would have been to betray him while he lived. And now he's dead. Yes, Wolfe said quietly. Now necessity compels me. You demanded truth. There it is. I knew him. I pitied him. I considered his guilt unbearable, but his conscience would not let him rest. I let the silence stretch, my anger cooling into something heavier. You could have told me this days ago. You let me chase ghosts while you sat here nursing secrets. I let you do your work, he said, because some truths corrode. If poured too soon, they eat away before form appears. You must understand, trust is not sharing everything at once. It is choosing the hour to speak. I sank into my chair, milk glass untouched, staring at him. I'm angry, Wolfe, but damn me, I see the logic. Still, it's a crack, the first real crack I've felt between us. He inclined his head, eyes steady. Cracks can be mended, Archie, so long as both ends wish it. Before I could answer, the bell rang with the force of a battering ram. I went to the door, knowing without doubt who it was. Inspector Kramer stood there, hat low, cigar chewed to ruin, face flushed with temper. He shoved past before I spoke. "Wolfe!" he barked, storming into the office. "I'm at the end of my rope. You sit here fat and silent while I chase shadows. The widow stonewalls, Corder slithers, Bristow shouts, and still no answers. You know more than you're saying. Either spit it or I swear I'll drag you down to Center Street tonight." Wolfe did not rise. He merely opened his eyes fully and regarded Kramer with patience that looked like provocation. "Inspector, sit." "I'll stand," Kramer snapped. "As you wish," Wolfe said. He poured a beer, filled the glass, and drank. "Your patience is short. I cannot lengthen it. The murderer remains unidentified. Your bluster will not alter that." Kramer's face turned crimson. "Don't play games. You think you're safe in this chair, but the law doesn't bend for you." "No," Wolfe agreed calmly, "nor does it bend for the guilty. That is why you must endure. You will have your killer, but not by storming my door." Kramer turned on me, jabbing a finger. "You, Goodwin, you've got a mouth. If he's keeping you muzzled, break the leash." I met his glare, felt Wolfe's eyes on me, and shook my head. "Sorry, Inspector. I don't break ranks that easy, not even when I'm sore at him." Kramer cursed, spat the cigar stub into the ashtray, and marched to the door. "One more day, Wolfe. If I've got nothing by then, you'll find the law has less patience than your orchids." The door slammed behind him, shaking the frame. Silence filled the office once more. Wolfe leaned back, eyes closed, hands folded. I sat, tension ebbing into weariness. "So, that's it," I said. "You knew Tillotson, knew his guilt, and held it until he died. Now the past is loose, and we're tangled in it." "Yes," Wolfe murmured. "And the killer?" Still veiled, I nodded slowly. "All right, I'll keep working. But Wolfe, don't ask me to like the silence, not any more." His eyes opened, steady. "I ask only for endurance, Archie. A little longer." The lamps flickered, the books lined the walls like silent witnesses, and the city's hum rose faint beyond the curtains. The truth had come at last, but the murderer walked free, and the crack between us remained. The plan was Wolfe's down to the minute. He gave the order that morning with the same finality he applied to orchids or dinner menus, and there was no mistaking its weight. "Archie," he said, "you will summon them, Mrs. Vance, Mr. Corder, Lieutenant Bristow. They will be here at 8 o'clock, Inspector Kramer as well. Ensure compliance." I asked if he expected them to waltz in willingly. He replied, "You are resourceful." That was the end of the debate. By late afternoon, my calls and veiled threats had done the trick. Pride, fear, or curiosity carried each of them. The stage was set. At 8 sharp, the brownstone was lit warmly, the curtains drawn, the office prepared like a courtroom. Wolfe sat in the yellow chair, broad and silent, a glass of beer on the stand beside him. I had placed 3 red chairs in a row facing the desk. Fritz had brought in an extra tray of glasses, though no one but Wolfe would touch the beer. The air smelled faintly of polish and the onions Fritz had chopped for the evening's soup. The bell rang once, heavy. I opened the door to find Eloise Vance wrapped in mink, eyes sharp as cut crystal. She swept inside without a word, perfume trailing like smoke, and allowed me to guide her to the red chair farthest left. She sat, legs crossed, gloved hands folded, gaze fixed on Wolfe with cold curiosity. 10 minutes later came Bristow, coat collar up, jaw set in permanent bitterness. He stomped in as if expecting a firing squad. I directed him to the centre chair. He sat heavily, fists on his knees, glaring first at me, then at Wolfe, then at the widow. Corder was last, 5 minutes behind schedule, which was in character. He entered with his fedora tilted, his smile easy, eyes measuring the room. I relieved him of his coat, steered him to the far right chair. He sank in comfortably, crossing his legs, hands folded loosely. At Wolfe's command, I phoned Kramer. He arrived on time, hat low, cigar unlit but clenched, shoulders tight. He took position near the bookshelves, arms folded. His eyes promised that if Wolfe's game wasted his evening, the price would be heavy. When all were assembled, Wolfe remained silent. He drank his beer in deliberate sips, his gaze heavy-lidded, letting the quiet stretch until the tension sharpened like wire. No one spoke first. The only sound was the tick of the clock and the faint murmur of traffic beyond the curtained windows. Finally, Wolfe set down his glass. "We are convened," he said. "Commander Tillotson is dead. The police speak of suicide. I do not. You three, Mrs. Vance, Mr. Corder, Lieutenant Bristow, each carry cause for enmity. Wolfe let the silence stretch, savouring its pressure as the clock ticked on the mantel. His lids lowered, then lifted again with the deliberation of a judge. Lieutenant Bristow, he said, you roar loudest. You claim Mrs. Vance is poison. State it. Bristow leaned forward, fists clenched. She ruined men in that tribunal. My career ended because she whispered in ears and let Tillotson speak lies. She laughed while I rotted. Mrs. Vance turned her head, eyes sharp as cut glass. You ruined yourself. My husband bore disgrace, not because of me, but because of men like you who blundered and failed. Wolfe's hand rose, stilling them both. Enough. Your bitterness, Lieutenant, is genuine but hollow. Anger is not proof. Bristow sputtered, but Wolfe turned to the widow. Madam, you told Mr. Goodwin you had not seen Commander Tillotson for months, yet the telegram from the Hotel Broxton, already in our possession, summons you on the very night he died. Why lie? Her smile was polished but strained. Because I saw no reason to feed gossip. He begged to meet. I refused. I leaned forward. You refused on paper, maybe. But Saul Pantzer saw you at the Broxton. Twice in the last week he also saw you with Corder, once at a restaurant, once leaving his office. You weren't avoiding gossip. You were hiding meetings. The faintest tremor touched her gloved hand, though her tone remained smooth. I'm not obliged to account for every errand. No, Wolfe said, but you are obliged when a man is dead. Fritz, tell them what you saw. Fritz, who had lingered discreetly at the door, stepped in with uncharacteristic gravity. That night, as the commander left, another man slipped quickly from the stoop. A stranger. I thought perhaps Mr. Goodwin knew of him. He did not. And so, Wolfe continued, the commander met you, madam. He left this house troubled. He saw you again that night at the Broxton. He was found dead within hours. And Corder, Wolfe's eyes shifted. You had already purchased the sealed tribunal file, the very words that branded him. You held the knife at his reputation's throat. Corder's smirk thinned. Information is business. That doesn't make me a killer. Wolfe's voice was quiet but heavy. You are not the killer. You are the lever. You pressed with the file. You whispered promises of scandal, but the hand that delivered poison into his glass was not yours. It was hers. Mrs. Vance's composure cracked. Colour rose in her cheeks, her lips tightening. You presume, I deduce, Wolfe cut in. He would not have placed a revolver so neatly. He was weary but not reckless. You went to him, offered false sympathy, and when he faltered you added powder to his drink. The gun beside his body was staging. His despair made your artifice plausible. Kramer growled, stepping forward. You hear that, lady? We've got motive, meeting, and means. Best speak now before the cuffs talk for you. She rose suddenly, voice sharp. Yes, he begged me for silence. He said the past would return. I told him I would not endure disgrace again. I slipped the powder in his glass and left him to his conscience. It was quick, clean, and you would have left it suicide if not for his cursed telegrams. The words hung like smoke, final and damning. She sank back into the chair, her elegance crumbled, her eyes dull with fury drained. Kramer's grin was fierce around the mangled cigar. There it is. Murder, in her own voice. Corder, you're coming too. File theft and blackmail are plenty for me. Bristow, you're free to stew in your bile. Let's go. He clamped a hand on Corder's shoulder, snapped for the widow to rise, and herded them out with relish. The front door slammed like a gavel. Silence reclaimed the office. Wolfe reached for his glass, filled it with deliberate calm, and drank. His eyes closed, lids heavy, as if the weight of the confession pressed more than it relieved. I leaned on the desk, watching him. Well, there it is. Vance poisoned him. Corder twisted the knife. Bristow just shouted at the shadows. Case closed. Wolfe opened his eyes a fraction. Case concluded, he said softly. Closure is another matter. Kramer's face split in a grim smile, his cigar nearly chewed through. There it is. A confession. Murder. Plain as day. He turned to Wolfe. At last. You took your time, but you nailed it. Wolfe did not answer. His face remained grave, his eyes distant. He lifted his glass, drank slowly, then set it down with care. There was no triumph in his manner, only weariness. I watched him, unsettled. For once, victory had brought no satisfaction. The truth was his, but he bore it like a stone. Kramer barked to me, "Goodwin, call a car. She's coming with me." I nodded, rising, while Fritz's quiet step sounded in the hall. He had lingered, listening, his eyes somber. Wolfe leaned back, silent, while the widow stared at nothing, her fury burned away. The office was quiet again after the storm. Kramer had gone, dragging Eloise Vance with him, her fury drained into silence. Fritz had cleared the glasses with unusual solemnity. The lamps glowed soft against the books, and Wolfe sat in the yellow chair, eyes half closed as if retreating to the safety of stillness. I leaned against my desk, arms folded, letting the hush stretch until it grew heavy. "Wolfe," I said finally, "we need to talk." His lids lifted a fraction. "Do we?" "Yes," I said. "For days you've left me in the dark. I had to drag each word out of you like pulling nails from oak. You knew Tillotson. You knew the tribunal. You sat silent while I stumbled through telegrams and widows' smiles. Why? Why keep me out?" He exhaled, long and slow. "Because I had promised silence. At that tribunal I was not merely interpreter. I was witness to men's ruin. I swore to myself, and to one of them, that I would not speak of it again. I believed silence the only honourable course." I stepped closer, voice sharp. "And what about me? We've worked together long enough to know that silence between us doesn't last. You didn't trust me enough to tell me when it mattered." His gaze fixed on me now, heavy but not unkind. "Archie, trust is not measured by the quantity of words shared. It is measured by the line each man honours. My command, your choice. I command, you obey, because you trust I do not waste that obedience. And you choose, I accept, because I trust your judgment. That is the bond. To keep silent then was to honour a vow. To speak now was necessity. Both acts spring from the same root." I paced once, then stopped, feeling the weight of his words. "You mean to say the silence and the disclosure both prove trust? That's a tidy trick." "It is not trickery," he said quietly. "It is survival. The world presses for confession. I resist. But necessity compels. Tonight it compelled. You asked, and the moment had come. I gave you the truth because you demanded it, not before." I stood, staring at him, feeling anger ease into something more complicated. "All right, I get it. You made a promise, and you kept it until you couldn't. I may not like the timing, but I understand the logic. Still," I paused, "I'll never look at you quite the same way again." His mouth tightened, then softened. "That is inevitable. The story I never told you is told now. It alters us. But the bond remains, Archie. We endure because we must." I sank into my chair, letting the tension drain. The case was over, the murderer in custody, the past dragged into light. Yet the office felt changed. Wolfe sat larger than ever in his chair, but not untouchable. For the first time I had seen the weight he carried from years before, and it shifted how I saw him. Fritz's step sounded faintly in the hall, then faded. Wolfe reached for his glass, drank, and set it down with care. "Archie," he said, voice calm, "we shall dine at 8 as always. Life continues." I nodded slowly. "Yes, life continues." But in my mind I added, "Not quite the same." At 8 sharp, Fritz entered with the same dignity he carried into every meal, no matter how tense the day had been. He wheeled the serving cart as if he were announcing ambassadors, the aromas rising in careful succession: roasted pheasant with herbs, potatoes browned just so, a bowl of buttered carrots, and a sauce fragrant with wine reduced to velvet. The silver gleamed, the linen was folded with military precision, and the look on Fritz's face declared that no crime, no scandal, no revelation of old wars would alter his devotion to the table. Wolfe left his chair reluctantly, rising with the deliberate effort of a man bearing weight heavier than his own frame. He moved to the dining room, lowered himself with practiced ease, and adjusted his napkin across his vast middle. I followed, taking my usual place. Fritz served with care, pouring beer into Wolfe's chilled glass until the foam crowned just below the rim, then setting a tumbler of milk before me. The ritual had not changed, yet the air around it was altered. We ate in near silence. Wolfe sampled sparingly, his fork seldom rising, though Fritz's pheasant deserved more attention than it received. I worked through my portion steadily, more for Fritz's sake than appetite. Each clink of silver on china sounded louder than words, and the hush between us was not anger, nor even distrust, but something weightier, the silence of men who had crossed a threshold neither wished to cross again. At length Wolfe spoke, his voice low, precise. "The matter is concluded. Mrs. Vance will stand trial. Corder will face charges of theft and coercion. Lieutenant Bristow will remain bitter but harmless. The record of that tribunal will be sealed once more." I set down my fork. "And Tillotson remains dead. His conscience carried more weight than any verdict." Wolfe inclined his head faintly. "Yes, that too is concluded." The words closed the subject, yet left it wide open. I drank my milk, cool and steady, and let the pause settle. Fritz entered again, cleared plates with his usual grace, and brought dessert, custard chilled to perfection. Wolfe tasted a spoonful, then set it aside. For him, appetite had not returned. When the table was cleared, Wolfe rose, bowed his head slightly to Fritz, and returned to the office. I trailed after, notebook under my arm, though there was little left to record. The lamps glowed as before, the book stood unchanged, and the yellow chair welcomed its master, as if no tribunal, no widow's fury, no confession of poison had disturbed the routine. Wolfe poured another beer, raised it, and drank with deliberate calm. I settled at my desk, the glass of milk I had carried with me cooling beside my papers. The clock ticked, marking the minutes until 9, when orchids would demand his presence. For once I found myself reluctant to watch the usual march of the evening. I broke the silence. "So, that's that. Case closed. Widow behind bars, Corder pinned, Bristow left to stew, and us back where we started." "Not where we started," Wolfe said. "The past is no longer wholly mine." His eyes met mine briefly, then lowered. "You demanded truth. I yielded. Our work continues. That is sufficient." I leaned back, letting the chair creak. "Sufficient, yes, but different. I'll never look at you the same way, Wolfe, not quite." He inclined his head, neither offended nor apologetic. "That is the price. We endure it." 9 o'clock struck. He heaved himself up, the movement slow, and departed toward the plant rooms. His footsteps climbed the stairs, then faded. The door closed above, sealing him with his orchids, as if nothing had changed. I remained below, the office dim, the glass of milk at my elbow untouched. I thought of the widow's collapse, her polished charm crumbling into confession. I thought of Tillotson, heavy with guilt until death carried him. And I thought of Wolfe sitting in that tribunal years ago, promising silence he had carried like a stone. Some stories, even when told, leave silences intact. Tonight had proved it. He had given me words, but they were framed by all he had not said, all he would never say. Our partnership survived, yes, but marked. I had seen the man behind the yellow chair more clearly, and I could not forget it. At last I drank the milk, cool against the weight of the night, and closed my notebook. The brownstone was quiet again, the rhythm restored, though altered. Wolfe tended his orchids above, Fritz reigned in the kitchen, and I, as ever, marked the silence.